And so then you have to kind of impart these qualities into a design to make, like, you have lures that are jerk bait lures. Mm-hmm. You have soft plastics that do all kinds of crazy non-mechanical motions. But the problem what we had with flies is none of that. They didn't do that. You had pulsing qualities. You could make them hover using neutral buoyant materials and stuff like that. And you would have feathers streaming off the back that might kind of flutter in the mm-hmm. water, but we didn't have any crazy swimming motions like you get with lures.
Right.
So that was my lifelong process at that point. Is like, that was the holy grail for me to design flies that would do that in the water.
This is the Tom Rowland Podcast. Fascinating stories to amaze, encourage, and inspire you in fishing, fitness, and the outdoors. And we're brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. I started this podcast as a way to connect with my friends, people that I admire and respect, and you. It has been a learning journey that's made me a better person, a better fisherman, a better father, and a better athlete. I'm so happy that you're on this journey with me, and I'd love to hear from you with show suggestions, guest suggestions, or questions. The best way to get a hold of me is through text. You can text 305-930-7346 for the fastest response, but if you prefer to email, you can send that to podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's a dedicated email address just for the show. If you like this show, you can show your support by posting about it on social media and tagging me. Text the link to a couple of friends that may also enjoy it, and subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you feel like I've earned it. The website is tomrowlandpodcast.com, and that is where everything lives. All past shows, you can go and listen to any show. You can look up all the different shows that we've done, both the How To Tuesdays, the full links, and the Physical Fridays. They all live on tomrowlandpodcast.com. And the social media is Tom_Rowland, ROWLAND, on Instagram, or you can go to our big account, Saltwater_Experience. I hope to hear from you soon. So now let's get on to today's show.
Hi, I'm Blane Chocklett, and this is a Tom Rowland podcast.
Blane, what's going on, man?
Not much. Just getting ready to start the musky season. It'll be a grind for the next 4 months. Usually start musky season late November, and it goes through mid-March. And I usually shut it down when the fish start showing signs of wanting to go spawn.
Huh. So why is that it's a winter time? Is that water levels? What is going on there?
So I'm being in Virginia, I'm in that southern realm of the musky range. And so up north, where musky season generally is from late summer through about now, they start shutting it down now because it turns to winter up there. And being in Virginia, the southern lowest part of their range, we have a much longer season of that prime time, basically. So up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, they usually have October and early November as being that prime time. And being in Virginia and we having those mild winters, we keep those water temperatures in the upper 30s, mid 30s to low 40s throughout most of the winter, unless we have a super cold winter. So those fish migrate into what I call their wintering spots, and it condenses everything. And those fish are kind of in that pre-spawn feeding during the entire winter, to be honest with you. And it really condenses everything. It just makes the fishing a lot easier, especially backing myself in a corner a long time ago trying to catch them on a fly rod.
Well, that's one of the things I want to talk to you about, because the muskie is a very interesting fish. It's a fish that's, probably not for you, is surrounded by mystery, but you've got it figured out now. But it probably at one point it was kind of a mysterious fish. I grew up in Tennessee, and the muskie is a native fish in Tennessee, but I've had very little luck catching them. I've had very little luck fishing for them, and they really haven't been something that I've fished for a lot. So you have to excuse me if I don't know much about the muskie. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here, because I want to learn a lot more about them. And one day I'd love to catch one.
Yeah.
But they were called the fish of 10,000 casts for so long, and it just, it was made out to be this fish that was like so difficult to catch. Then why would you even try, for a lot of people? And and all of a sudden, I'm looking at your Instagram and everything, and you're catching them on fly, and you're doing all these things that are supposed to be not the way that muskies behave, right? Like, you're not going to go out there and cast 10,000 times with a fly rod. Your arm would fall off, right? So you've figured something out. I'd love to know what the process of kind of targeting that fish as something that you wanted to really figure out, and what it was like to go from that to being able to catch them consistently, and you're catching huge ones on fly.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long process. I've been guiding over 30 years, and a big part of that was, growing up in, that era where we started having incredible TV shows that started coming along when I was in high school. Flip Pallet Show, mm-hmm. Walker's Cay, and a really good friend of mine and mentor, Larry Dahlberg, mm-hmm. came around and was doing that hunt for big fish. And it started off as these little 5-minute episodes that kind of led into some other shows. And then it kind of morphed into the bigger show that it was for so long. And I remember seeing, as a teenager, we didn't, living in the sticks in the mountains here in Virginia, my parents had some property, and for us to be able to get cable, we had to tear down too many trees and get satellite. So back then, cable wouldn't run up far enough, so it was way too expensive. So the only way I could ever watch cable was to go see my grandmother, and I'd go hang out with her on a Friday night and eat pizza and whatever, and get up on Saturday mornings and watch ESPN Saturday morning, outdoors, and having those shows. And one particular morning, Dahlberg was fishing for muskies up in Canada, and he was targeting them on a fly rod, and that kind of sparked it. And around that same time, my uncle and I were fishing on some of my local rivers here on the James and the New Rivers, and we were smallmouth fishing. And next thing you know, a smallmouth gets eaten by muskie, and that kind of triggered that whole thing with me. I was like, as soon as I saw that, it's like, I've got to figure this out, And at that point, I was starting to catch a lot of different other species. I was fly fishing at the time, but really didn't know a whole lot about it, and we had all these mentors come along, and it really kind of sparked my interest. And I kind of fell into being able to target not only trout, which a lot of people start fishing for, but being in Virginia, we have so many diverse fisheries here for smallmouth bass and stripers, landlocked and saltwater. And it really allowed me to be able to have a giant classroom and learn from all these different species and see how they feed. But I also met a good friend and mentor, Harrison Steves, who is a biologist at Virginia Tech. And he had a good friend of his, Steve Heiner, who was an aquatic entomologist. I met them when I was in high school on the Jackson River, which is a tailwater here in Virginia. And he taught me, Harrison being an incredible fly tyer, how important it was to kind of match the hatch and figure out what the fish are feeding on. And all that kind of morphed into my career now as a guide, just learning at a really young age, at 16, how important it is to figure out what the fish are feeding on. And just having a God-given talent to be able to be an artist. And I was able to take that artistic talent and put it into fly design. Man. And just having an understanding, as you know, about fish behavior, and it's just kind of it's in you. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, it comes with a lot of experience, and it comes with, one thing, like when you said that you saw a smallmouth get eaten by a muskie, and that really triggered it. I can think about the first time I ever saw, something get eaten by a barracuda, and I was like, oh my God, like I love that fish all of a sudden. And then it's like, now I know what a lure needs to do. Now I know what a fly needs to do. Now I know what these fish are looking for, because you see it in action. And it's many of those, I think, with many different species. But one of the things that I was going to ask you was, how did you start to learn what these fish are eating? Because I'm sure they have a variety of things that they like to eat at different times of the year. So how do you diagnose what they're eating?
All right. For me, it all comes back from that trout background and learning from Harry and understanding the foods that are available in a given fishery. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, early on, I was able to get some books, McCafferty's Guide to Aquatic Entomology. Steve Heiner, the entomologist, I mean, he really made it very clear that how important it was for me to do that if I wanted to really understand fish behavior and all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all connected from when even predators, the muskie starting off as a fry and what they are feeding on when they're small, and then what they go to when they move to different sizes, and all predatory fish are like that. So understanding all the different foods in a given river, say the New River or the James here in Virginia, it was important to me as a young age. I mean, and being in school and taking biology, so you have that understanding and that bringing to your attention as you go through school and environments and fish behavior or whatever, ecosystems and all that stuff. So you study that. So it was pretty easy at that time in me growing up in school and having the interest I did in fishing to want to understand what types of baits are in the rivers, smallmouth bass being predators and all that, and kind of looking at it from all different food sources and learning that and reading whatever I could back then. I mean, it's before internet, obviously. And the information is so readily available now. It's just a different world, as you know.
Right.
But back then, it wasn't a whole lot of information out there other than books, right? And some shows. But now it's so readily available. It really makes it much easier to understand what you're trying to target, whether you're going some exotic place somewhere in the world. But for me, it was super important understanding that and what fish are feeding on, whether it's bugs, whether it's invertebrates, whether it's other bait fish or even other predatory fish. I mean, muskies are the apex predator in any environment that they live in. And it doesn't, if it's acting and making these triggers that make these fish feed, it's going to look at that as a food source. It could be a smaller muskie. It could be a pike. It could be anything. And I mean, it doesn't take much to get on the internet and look, and you could see muskies eating anything from ducks to other muskies to other pike. And I mean, it's like you're saying with barracuda, muskies are, and this, we could dive into how they feed and what they're thinking. And I mean, but it took me a long time to obviously understand what I was really targeting. And, I owe a lot of that to one, my dad always told me, he goes, if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. Right. Yeah. So I got the same advice. Hard-headed. Yeah. I was too hard-headed and too stupid to quit. So, I mean, I saw Larry doing it up in Canada when I was younger, and I was like, we have him here and I'm going to figure this out or it's going to kill me. But meeting Harris and Steve's when I was 16 and starting that relationship brought me more into the fishing, fly fishing scene specifically. And he introduced me to going to some of the shows that are still going on today, like the fly fishing show that the Perimskis put on. And I was able to meet a lot of these people that I grew up idolizing, like Lefty and Flip and Dahlberg. And really, most importantly for me as a fly designer, especially someone that was kind of not getting tired of trout, but being that I was focused on trying to catch muskies early on, a guy named Bob Popovics, who is one of the greatest fly designers ever, was very kind when I was very young, and he was always willing to help me. And he always told me to think outside the box. And it was always telling me that great fly design is always coming from problem solving. And learning all this stuff and kind of falling into the right spot at an early age kind of put me in the direction where I am now. And I mean, without those people kind of directing and guiding me and kind of being able to bounce ideas off of them and telling them what I'm seeing and all that kind of stuff. And then having the unbelievable mind of Dahlberg out there and meeting him later on in life, but being able to see part of his show where he talks about how and why he was doing certain things, and going into his what I would call his laboratory, and he's designing flies and designing lures and explaining why they work and how they work. And Dahlberg was telling me a while ago about Doug Hannon, the bass professor, and talking about his philosophy on how bass feed and all that kind of stuff really stuck with me, because it made so much sense. And in living up here in the mountains and living and seeing fish in crystal clear water most of the time, you're able to see their reactions to what you're throwing at them, whether it's a positive reaction or a negative. You're seeing a reaction. So you understand the triggering qualities versus the attracting qualities. Attracting qualities are great, but the real deal is the triggering qualities that make them finally make that decision to eat it. And it's like you're talking about with that barracuda. I mean, there's certain things that you have to do to make that fish finally do what it does.
Right. So in your fishing, you're sight fishing these muskies all the time.
You can. So most of the time in the winter, we have higher water. The leaves are off the trees, so our water table builds up a lot more in the winter. What I figured out years ago, and this was from just getting my butt kicked and not understanding what it took to catch them, but I did have a buddy that was into musky fishing, that I was the only person I knew that fly fished. But he met a guy that was really into musky fishing, and he started targeting them on conventional tackle. And me being a smallmouth guide at the time, this is moving forward a little bit. I started a fly shop back in '95, right out of high school and 2 years into college. I just this is what I wanted to do, and I knew it. So I just bit the bullet and opened up a fly shop, and I was guiding. I got a drift boat, but it didn't take long to figure out where muskies would be during certain times of the year, especially in the summer months when we have super low clear water. So I'd started seeing muskies, and I don't have a problem talking about it. I mean, I have a big problem with people targeting muskies in the southern range in the summer, because it's very easy to know exactly where they're going to be. They're going to find any spring, whether it's coming out from the bottom of the river or a trout stream that's flowing in. They're going to be in that cooler water, and they will be stacked in there like a parking lot. So before I knew better, I'd have my buddy David meet me after guiding smallmouth bass, and we would go to these areas where I would see them in the summer in the evenings as water temperatures are cooling, and we would target these fish. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the flies that I was throwing had no triggering qualities at all. He would give me hour or 2 hours in the bow.
What were you throwing at the time? What kind of flies would you throw?
Different variations of deceivers, and synthetic style stuff. And there was a lot of stuff happening back then, and this would have been in the mid 90s. But it wasn't until Popovic's and some of his stuff that he did with his hollow style flies and creating that illusion of mass, and that changed everything. His beast flies. Until I started playing around with that style of fly, I wasn't getting the reactions that I was looking for, because like I said, I would fish for an hour or two on the bow and knowing exactly where they were, and have my buddy David be rowing me and putting me in position. And, I'd just give up after a while, and he'd step up there with certain lures, especially at that time, bucktails, which are these big spinner baits. So that would be anywhere from that long to 15 inches long, throwing it out there, and he'd get a bite almost immediately. So it was obvious to me as a guide in understanding bass behavior and trout behavior that these flies had zero triggering qualities or even attracting qualities that made a fish that our average muskie is 40 inches long. So I also learned that it's very apparent that muskies, and especially learned it later on in life, that being that they are the most apex predator in any body of water that they live in, they're very cat-like and very snake-like in the fact that they may feed once or twice a week max. And if they get a big enough food source, they may not feed for 10 days or longer, right? Unless the right food comes along. They're going to be opportunistic like anything else, but they don't have to feed like the average fish does, like on an everyday process, like trout or bass or a lot of different species. because of the foods that they eat are pretty big. Here locally, most of it are suckers. And our sucker species are hog suckers or red horse suckers. I mean, the average fish will be 12 to 15 inches long. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if a big food is available. And the other thing about muskies, and the reason that they are the fish at 10,000 casts, before I forget this, is they're so efficient at what they do. When they decide to go kill something, they just go kill it and they eat it, and then they go back to their lair basically, and they'll sleep until they decide that they are hungry again. And I've been able to observe these fish being asleep for so long that they'll have sand on their back.
Really?
Which, yes. And you could poke them with a rod and they won't move. And you have to really shove a rod at them for a while before they'll wake up out of this catatonic sleep. And
have you ever gotten one of those type of fish to eat after you wake them up like that?
We have. And generally, and this is summertime stuff. And like I said, this was 20 some years ago. And I finally, a light bulb went off in my head and said, you know what you're doing is not right. Messing with these fish while they're on springs, they're there for a reason. And so, but what I do and what I have done is I've had some film crews here over the past where, if you want to take a GoPro and on a shaft and put it down there in their face and kind of get their reaction and get up close shots, it's kind of a cool place to go do that. Some people might view that as being harassing them and stuff, but you know what? They've harassed me forever.
That's how I feel about the permit. Any chance I get to bother them, I'm going to, because they've bothered me forever.
Same deal. So it's funny. So once you wake them up, they're pissed off. They really are. And they're one of the few fish that will make eye contact with you. Once a muskie knows that you're there and you're targeting them, they have a tendency to kind of roll like tarpon, and they'll roll up by the boat and they'll turn sideways and make eye contact with you.
Wow.
They're like letting you know, I'm here. It's an aggressive display of aggression, saying, this is my territory. I know you're here. I don't like you being here. So a lot of times when we'll do that, and this one particular time, a friend of mine from Buffalo came down to do a little short video that he was trying to start as he was starting his new career in guiding. He wanted to do a little short places that he's gone and learned from and all kinds of stuff like that. And he came down here and we got some underwater stuff of muskies on springs. We weren't targeting them at all. We were just it'd be cool video, put it down there and then have them, swim around it and swim off. And so this one particular day after we did that, there was probably 7 or 8 muskies, stuck right beside each other. And when they laid at a spring, they will lay right beside each other. And it just looks like logs.
Yeah.
Looks like a parking lot.
Yeah.
So once you stir them up, they kind of take off and they'll start rolling around out in the middle of the river or whatever. So we just started fishing again for smallmouth. And, I don't know, maybe 100 feet downstream of where we disturb these fish, he catches like a 16-inch smallmouth bass. And it wasn't 10 seconds that one of those fish that was pissed just crushes that smallmouth like 10 foot off the boat. And it happened to be a giant, you know what I mean? And so it just lets you know that they're just they do have this whole mystique and this almost like a legend about them, like a fairy tale muskies. I mean, people that really follow them, there's all kinds of legends and lore that go along with them. And there's a lot of truth to it. But, for me to see how they react like that, I mean, it just makes you love them that much more, but they're part of the problem too. And learning how to catch them, going back to that, was just getting my butt kicked and not knowing what I was doing, because I really didn't have anybody to teach me other than the conventional tackle that I was seeing that was working. And I could tell that his vibrations were a big part of it. He would use glide baits where they would really move left and right and show a lot of profile. And you could see at that point when especially on the glide baits that they would pick certain times when they would hit it. And it was when it was showing the most profile on a hang. So then I started thinking about the biology of the fish and their biologic makeup, which to me, I think is highly overlooked. So you could look at, say, the face of a muskie. They're very similar to a lot of fish, what I would call fish with teeth. They usually have a longer face, barracuda, kingfish, Spanish, all those fish. So I started studying how they feed, and why do they have teeth, and all that was a big part of the process of designing flies that would start getting these fish to start reacting positively to what I was doing. So when you start looking at the biologic makeup of the fish and the food source that it's in that given body of water, all these little pieces of the puzzle started coming together. And so I started realizing you have bucket mouth feeders that inhale baits. And then you start looking at, say, trout, brown trout. Once they get to a certain length, their mouths started getting longer and they start having bigger teeth. And those are designed to grab and hold onto. So you start looking at how they eat and what's the best way of getting them to trigger positively on what you're throwing, whether it's a lure or whatnot. It's showing profile, right? So the biggest part with muskies to even get their attention at all was to have something big enough that would make them want to see what it was. They are very curious creatures, but and that's why you get what you call follows for muskies. I mean, they'll follow baits, they'll follow live baits, they'll follow flies. But a lot of times they will not eat them. I mean, I've had muskies follow flies for 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, you could be rowing backwards and just have them follow the fly upriver, sideways, wherever, and still won't eat it. And the reason that is because it's not doing what a prey creature will do. You don't get that frantic, I got to get out of here, that fight or flight.
That's why that deal, that figure eight is so effective at the boat, because I guess I always envisioned it that the bait fish is going to the boat. It could be a log, it could be whatever. It's like, oh no, and it freaks for a second. Yep. And that's like the most natural behavior of that whole, like you got this muskie behind you, or a barracuda behind you, or a kingfish behind you, or something with teeth behind you. You don't just ease out of there, as fast as you can strip it with a fly rod. You freak, right? Like that's the worst case scenario for a bait fish. And so that's what I always thought is that, when you hit that figure eight, it's like, that is the most natural that you could make it right there.
It is. And so then you have to kind of impart these qualities into a design to make, like, you have lures that are jerk bait lures. You have soft plastics that do all kinds of crazy non-mechanical motions. But the problem what we had with flies is none of that. They didn't do that. You had pulsing qualities. You could make them hover using neutral buoyant materials and stuff like that. And you would have feathers streaming off the back that might kind of flutter in the water, but we didn't have any crazy swimming motions like you get with lures.
Right.
So that was my lifelong process at that point. Is like, that was the holy grail for me to design flies that would do that in the water. And Popovic's hollow flies and his beast flies got the fish's attention with the mass, so that was part of it. But we would have a whole lot more follows than we would actually have eats. So then you kind of figure out, how can you make a fly kind of dart, move around? So we figured out using like the whole muddler style head, which is just a bulbous head that has deer hair, but you could also use synthetic fibers or whatever. But you create a massive head. And what happens when you strip that, it stalls out faster because of the bigger head. And then it wants to kind of kick off left or right or up and down, and which is all good stuff. So then at that point, you make a hard strip and the fly will do that and turn off. So all those kind of things started that whole, like, all right, now we're starting to get fish that actually will eat the fly. And Dahlberg's diving head, it creates bubbles and it dives down and it'll float up. And you can do quicker versions of that. But the thing is that it will dry slowly and hover. And that's one thing that a fly has over lures generally, is, you could keep it in their face for a long time, almost like a gnat. And I always tell my clients, that's what you are, because you have to make that fish want to get tired of it being in their field of awareness. And they don't have hands. So the only way they can get it out of their territory is eat it,
right?
Or bite at it. So
whether or not they're hungry, right? Like,
right.
I mean, one thing I saw on your Instagram that I thought was very interesting and brought it into my world a little bit is that you, excuse me, you said that you were cobia fishing And you said that the cobia and the muskie had a lot of similarities in what they wanted and how they fed. What do you think about that? What did you discover about the cobia? Because they're a funny fish. They can be the most aggressive fish in the ocean. They can be the stupidest fish in the ocean. And they can also be the smartest, pickiest fish in the ocean, to where the fly actually rolls across their head and they will not eat it, right? And same thing with, like, if you get them eating live baits, and then or if they're eating live baits and then you start throwing them dead baits and they see how easy that is to eat the dead pilchards, you can forget about catching them on a lure or a fly, because they will just let it roll across their head because they just are keyed into something. But what did you discover about the cobia and the muskie?
Well, it's like you were saying. I mean, they're kind of like initially they could be that ballroom, the barroom brawler, like you just the biggest meathead in the room,
right?
But that they have a very fast learning curve, and I have noticed. So Virginia, and I'm sure you're probably very aware of the trouble cobia are kind of in all over the country. I mean, they've been targeted by a variety of anglers all over the country, from the Gulf all the way up to Virginia, right? And Virginia in the Bay, they migrate up our way and usually are in the Bay first part of June. So once that happens, the Chesapeake Bay is one of the largest estuaries in the world, and a lot of the cobia will spawn in the bay. So you just have this huge migration of cobia that come into the bay. And what's happened over the years, since the striped bass populations have kind of died off in the bay and other fisheries, the cobia became a very important fishery for all these captains and all these anglers, because there really wasn't a whole lot of other fish to fish for. And so the cobia towers were invented. So you have all these huge towers where people are targeting these fish. And you're right. Like generally, when cobia are not messed with, and I've caught them in different parts of the country, they can be pretty easy to catch, especially if they're in that mood. But like you said, though, they can not be in that mood, and then you've got to feed them like any top predator, right? Just like feeding tarpon or anything else, you've got to do everything right to make them eat. And that's what I kind of fell in love with. I kind of got into the cobia fishing here in the bay later on, after everybody's like, it's any given day in the summertime, there may be 100 boats out there on these fish. And I mean, it doesn't take long to know where the fleet is. I mean, the bay is only so big, so you get out there and these fish may be running down an edge of a bar, right? And they just keep streaming by, and they're up on the surface, and you get 100 boats casting at you, just like tarpon season. These fish become super weary, and they become very. I mean, you have to put it in their place, in their field of awareness at the exact right time, and then turn them into the predator that they are. And not doing it right on a lot of times, but also designing the flies like the Game Changers that I've done that have that three-dimensional profile and swimming action, that have all these built-in triggers. I was able to figure out, like, you put any certain fly in front of them, it just didn't do it. They may come up to it and then they veer off, right? And what I've noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed it or not, that you have about 20-foot max on these fish as soon as they see it, if they're going to eat it or not. And a lot of times they'll end up following it, but then they're just kind of playing with you, but I have caught cobia on figure eights, just like musky, which is super cool.
Yeah.
I even stuck a 70-pound cobia last summer on a figure eight and just didn't have enough. I didn't have enough force to be able to get a hook in him. I fought him for like 20 seconds and he just spit it out. Their mouths are so tough. It's hard to get a good hook in them sometimes. Yeah. But what I noticed is just their behavior when they are being finicky was very similar. So you start doing that fight or flight, right? And you put a fly within 10 foot of their face as they're cruising. And once they see the fly, you start running it from them. That triggers them to start running after it a lot of times. So, but once they you have that field of awareness where they start realizing there's a boat out there. You know what I mean? And that stuff I'm starting to see a lot here, especially as they're getting pressured so much that you have, like I said, you have about a 20-foot area where they're going to eat it. And the same with muskies a lot of times now here in our rivers, that they're getting pressured. We love all our fish to death, and it's good that we have a lot of anglers going after these fish, because the more fish that appreciates what we have, the more we can protect it. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, it makes the job a lot harder to catch them regularly. Right. So,
what's funny about fish like cobia. Cobia is a good eating fish, right? So if very few of the legal fish are getting released, at least where we are. I don't know. So
same here.
That 100%. Cuts down on the learning curve a lot, because if a fish gets caught and released like a trout in the Madison River, they can be pretty spooky. Like, I've seen this before. I've heard this before. Bonefish, tarpon, permit. People don't kill them a lot, right? So you can recapture the same fish. And so I think that with a fish like that, they get even more spooky, where this is what the first time I ever went to Louisiana and fished for the redfish down there, I was like, oh my God, these redfish are just, it's incredible. They're like the stupidest fish I've ever seen, but they're also maybe the most aggressive fish. I don't know what it is. And my friend that lives there, he said, well, every legal redfish gets killed. So you only fool them once. And I thought about that. I was like, there's something to that. Like, all these other fish that we're catching, you're catching and releasing and catching and releasing for them to have that same experience over and over again. And then that makes you kind of wonder about the fish's brain. Like, what is it that they remember from that? Is their brain capable of that? I think that it probably is. They have a negative experience with a bird or whatever, then they tend to avoid those type of situations in their life, where they see something overhead and they freak, right? I mean, maybe that's in their DNA, and maybe that's a negative experience. But it is kind of interesting to think about that with the cobia. Like, what if everybody was releasing them, and then how smart would those fish get?
Right. Yeah, I just think it's the boat traffic more than anything. Yeah. And then they may see their butt. They they a lot of times they're not by themselves, right? So I don't know if I'm not going to say that they have that cognitive of a brain that they can say, but I do think that they have a negative feel when they feel a boat, and then they visually put eyes on it. And I think that's why I think you have that short window where you have to have something that's these triggering qualities, positive triggering qualities that make them want to eat then, especially here. And you hear about North Carolina when they're migrating through North Carolina, a lot of the captains, and I know down there, say they're just dumb as dirt. And I truly believe they're just not seeing the pressure until they get into the bay, and then they're getting hammered every day. Right. And I think it just becomes a very tense situation. I mean, I think they just, I think it's just a survival deal that's inbred in them for sure.
But they definitely get smarter and you're right. Like, there is, if you get, I don't know, maybe like a fly cast away, like a good fly cast, maybe 80 feet, you get inside of that. And, if you don't make a good cast and they follow, now that fish is going to be hard to catch. But, a lot of times, like if you're doing it differently, like sometimes we'll fish cobia in 200 feet of water or more, and you're bringing up a fish, and all of a sudden 50 or 60 cobia come up with a snapper or with something else, and they're just curious. They're just looking, and every one of those fish is going to eat anything that you put in the water, because they'll come right to the boat, but it's that first time. And then they kind of lollygag on the surface a little bit, and then they go down. You're going to bring them up a couple of times, and then they're just not going to play that game anymore. They're just not down with it anymore.
Yeah, I think it's the curiosity side of cobia that I think is very similar to muskies. I think they, like you said, they don't mind hanging around the boat once they know you're there, but the likelihood of them eating is a lot slimmer. And this summer we actually we were fishing some pilings in the bay, the bridge pilings, and there was a school of maybe 10 of them, mid 40-inch fish, really nice cobia. And we were trying to pull them off with flies, and they kept going to the transom with the motor. They had some curiosity with the transom, and muskies do the same thing. I've had one client specifically, we running up years ago in a jet boat to get into this one pool, and I'm at the bottom of the pool, and I was like, all right, go ahead and stand up and stretch your line and get your fly wet and all. And strip line out and kind of get it right. And we'll just move up here a couple hundred yards and we'll start fishing. And I've got the motor on. We're probably going about 5 miles an hour, just cruising up the edge. And his fly is like literally right beside the motor, 5 feet from the motor. And a mid 40-inch muskie comes up and eats it right at the transom with right next to the motor.
Take and that, 10,000 casks.
I know, right? It's like, but the same deal happened with these cobia. I mean, we pulled them off with the fly, but after they got off the piling, they kind of lost that interest in feeding, but then they saw the motor. So they go to the motor and all of them got behind the motor and was just kind of hanging with the motor. I don't know what they were doing. And the captain I was with said, "Hey man, just drop the fly back there." And I dropped it back to transom. I couldn't see the fish because they were directly behind the boat. And I was at the bow, and I put it right at the edge of the transom and just started jerking the fly, making it kind of turn and jerk. And one of those bigger ones just came up and engulfed it.
Wow.
And I think it had to do, that jerk and showing profile and acting wounded. So, but you could do that 100 times and they won't eat it either. Right. I mean, that's the thing about these fish and their curiosity.
The cobia is a fish that's known for getting tough to catch and hanging around the motor or the side of the boat like that, or right on the chum bag, and people free gaff them because they can't catch them on a rod and reel, but they can stick a gaff in the water and then they pull it in like that. And you can look at them and you're like, that one's legal. Free gaff them like that, and a lot of people do that, but it's not an uncommon thing for them to get so difficult that you can't catch them on bait, you can't catch them on anything, right? Like they just get tough. I want to talk about your path to the game changer, because it's really what you're known for. I like looking at your stuff because I like it that you fish for all these what I would call weird fish, even though they're not weird fish, but like. I don't think that there is a trash fish, that there is such a thing. I love all fish and I love all tackle and love fishing for whatever, like smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, bowfin, snakeheads, any of it, it would be fine to me. And you're doing a lot of that. I want to get to that. But I want to talk about this path to the game changer, because what you've created is really interesting and unique. I mean, most things that I see in fishing, first of all, are just a variation of something else, like an evolution of something else. But what you've created is something, then maybe you would say it is an evolution of something else. I don't know. But to me, the first time I saw it, I was like, man, that is totally original and absolutely unique. And then what I've seen over time is that this is not just a fly. This is like a platform. That's what you refer to it a lot. It's a tying platform, not unlike maybe somebody creates a new lure, like Larry Dahlberg's lure with the Whopper Plopper. Like that's so unique and original. And then now I'm seeing other lure companies do something similar to that. And he has created like a platform. That's like a new lure platform. You've done that with a fly, this game changer. And if anybody doesn't know what the game changer is, how would you describe the game changer?
The game changer, see, I had a problem calling it that, but a bunch of buddies, generally, I'm generally shy by nature and I don't ever want to come across as being cocky or at all. But the game changer was a bunch of buddies of mine telling me, I was like, look at this thing I've been messing with. And I was telling them how the fish reacted to it. And, you look at the action in the water and there's like, it's like, man, it's a real game changer for me. It's like, that's exactly what you need to call it. And it's like, well, it sounds pretty cocky, it's like, but it was, and that's what it is. I mean, it was backing myself into a corner years ago and trying to target muskies on a fly rod and guiding for them. It's a school of hard knocks, learning from making terrible flies and thinking that you have the answer. And like I said, going back to what Popovich was teaching, is a good fly design generally comes from problem solving.
Right.
So what did
the early game changers look like? Like the first evolution of this thing? Because I can, some of my things just look horrible of any fly that I've ever tried to tie. Like I know what it needs to do, and I'm not the artist that you are. And I go to the vise and I create this thing that I mean, it is the worst looking thing ever. Maybe you catch a fish on it or whatever, and then you start to refine this process. And I know that's what you've done. But that's what I'm really interested
100%.
in is the early horrible flies. What did they look like?
Yeah. Well, so what's really ironic is like, a lot of times guiding, I mean, I'm sitting on the boat and I'm just constantly, waking up from sleep and just, you're always, being really into what you're doing, right? Especially early on. It's just, it's everything to you to be successful. And you're making this your career. So your success on the water with clients directly impacts your wallet, right? So, I was obsessed with, in learning from these great designers and tires. Hold on a second.
And you're dreaming about this, like I could tell, like you just made a little mention of it. It's like you wake up and you start thinking, and then you just kind of glossed over that. But I thought of so many times where I woke up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to try that because I had some sort of dream about, like you're just dreaming about it. You're thinking about this stuff all the time. Anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you, but sorry.
No, but that's it. I got obsessed with creating a fly that would look and swim like the real thing and have these non-mechanical actions that make a lot of the hard baits and soft plastics so successful, like flukes or jerk baits or glide baits. So, there was a lot of attempts and failures. And one of my most successful fly patterns that I ever created was called the Gummy Minnow. So the Gummy was a fly created, I don't know, back in the late 90s. And it was my first attempt of creating a fly that looked and swam like the real thing. It failed miserably at swimming like the real thing, but it had the exact look of the bait that you were trying to match, whether it be a glass minnow or silver sides or anchovies or whatever it might be. So I guess the thing that it's really helped me in my designing is if I don't have a material that I'm looking for, I'll figure out a way to make it or ask enough questions to, if you ask enough questions, a lot of times you will find the answers. And having a fly shop at that time, I had enough customers in different fields of, I had some chemists that would come in. I had some people that were in, petroleum products or whatever,
So what kind of questions are you asking them?
It's like, so I would have I have this idea. I want to make a sheet of this material to where there would have adhesive where I could kind of build a fly from the inside out to create a 3-dimensional look and be able to laminate materials over it. And I could add feathers if I wanted to. How would I go about doing that? Is there something out there that I'm not aware about that already exists? And, so those would be the questions. And, I would get vats of different stuff from some of these chemists. And so it was kind of funny. I failed miserably at chemistry in high school. It was horrible. So anything that had to do with math, I was just horrible at. Right. So it's like, so I'm sitting here playing with this stuff and I finally met some people that were in the textile industries and other stuff. And I was like, there's got to be something out there. And, ended up falling into the right lap of this one guy that came in and he said, we got some stuff. He goes, I could send you some products and it's like, play around with this. And I'd already had the fly in my mind. I just didn't have the materials to make it. And so once I got the materials, the Gummy Minnow literally took me 5 minutes at the vise to put together. So back, and you probably remember this, back when Cape Lookout, North Carolina became super popular back in the late 90s at Harker's Island, kind of the who's who of fly fishing would come there, Sage back in the day. Jerry Seam, all those guys, Jerry Gibbs.
I remember Doug Kilpatrick used to go up to that thing and he used to come back and tell us about all these, Jarowski. He would go up there, Ed Jarowski, and he would fish with him. Flip. Yeah, all the guys, everybody was up there.
Yep. So, and Popovics would come down, and fast forwarding it, after meeting him early on in the mid 90s, I created that fly right in 98. And I never fished it. It was late in the season when I'd say September or something, when I finally got the materials, and I hadn't fished it. And, but I tied a couple hundred of these gummies to take down to Harker's Island for the false albacore blitz. And, Tom Earnhardt, used to have a party there. And Jones Brothers Boats would and they would have a pig picking, and it was just kind of a big industry party, really, to celebrate fly fishing. And that was a really big deal. And it was kind of a great way for me, I was, my mid-20s at the time, a great place for me to get to see people like Lefty and kind of just get to know some of these industry leaders. Right. Mm-hmm. And I knew that Popovic's was going to be down there. My problem with the gummy, it's all acrylic materials, and it's most people would say it's not a fly at all. Mm-hmm. Right. So that was what I was worried about. And I had no idea if it was going to swim. It would stretch. I could stretch it 3 times its original length. And I was like, well, it kind of has the feel of some of these flukes and stuff. Right. But so I thought it would be a great idea to take these flies and let Bob Popovic decide it, because, he was the only one at the time that was playing with a lot of synthetic materials and
epoxies and stuff.
Yeah. Silicones and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, if anybody would say this is a fly or not, he would be the one. And so I found him. He was the first person I saw there, and I bothered him enough it's like, what do you think of this? And he loved it. He wanted to know all about it. And, he said, he goes, hang out here for a second. And this was in a backyard of Tom's house, and it's right along the water. And I just remember the sun setting, I was in line to get the barbecue and whatnot. And Popovic comes back and he goes, I want you to come meet somebody. And it's like several hundred people there, and the spotlight coming down from the house. And right in the center of this, I'm walking through these people, and you just see this like center in the middle of this crowd is Lefty, right? So Lefty's in the middle, and Lefty, how great he was. And Bob said, I don't know if you know Lefty or not. I was like, well, I've met him a couple of times, but I didn't think he would remember me from Adam.
He did, though.
But he had my flies. Oh yeah, he had the best memory of anybody I've ever met.
Yeah.
And so Lefty's like, these are great, and he goes, how do they work? And Lefty being Lefty, it's like, this would be like rolling a bottle of wine in a jail cell. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like
a wine bottle in a drunk tank.
Yeah. Right. So he was like, just super positive and very helpful, along with Popovic. And Lefty took several of them, and being as humble as he was, he goes, do you mind if I have a few? And I'm like, are you kidding? You can have as many as you want. Right. And so that was on a Saturday night. And this was back before cell phones and or ones that I could afford anyway. And that next Monday, Lefty was leaving that next day. But that next Monday, I got off the water, and a guy had a message at the hotel I was staying in to call my wife. And so I called her, and she gave me this number to the fly czar at Uncle Feather Merchants. So I'm like, okay. So I call him. And he's like, he goes, I haven't seen the fly. He goes, I got a call from Lefty. He goes, he said, without a doubt, he goes, you guys need this fly. It's, and that kind of started my designing career. And, but going back, making this story way too long, going back to that fly failed miserably as a swimming fly. Mm-hmm. It had triggering qualities because of how realistic it looks. And it's great if you pitch it in to visual sight feeding fish. I mean, it's worked extremely well on all types of tuna species and whatnot, but I was really wanting it to have that swimming action. That was the biggest thing, because what really triggers fish to come to your offering is movement first, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So if you can get them to start moving towards what you're doing and keep them enthralled, and then have that last bit, is it food, and have that instinctual, innate biologic deal that makes every predator do what it does to eat it.
Absolutely nailed why I think we don't have any good permit flies. It's motion. Like, that's what I'm all about, the motion. Maybe you come up with a game changer crab one of these days.
I have some stuff, and
I'd like to see it.
Well, I'd love for you to try a few. My problem is I
want to get back to where the Gummy Minnow becomes the game changer. I had to interrupt you there because
it's what we're here for. But so that, to me, the gummy was a failure. And then, so I'm like, all right, obviously this isn't moving like I want it to. And how can I get it to move? So, I started looking at jointed lures, and that was all coming around. It's like, well, if you have hinges and stuff, that'll work. So what I decided to do is I took a piece of silly skin and I put this mesh material in it. And then I started putting these little parts that were joints of
what
silly
did you
skin.
start making that of silly skin? That was the first one. The joint was silly skin. Yeah. And you thought that might be tough enough to handle casting and fish biting it. And
well, at that point I was just trying to get the movement and then I was going to go from there.
Right.
And that was kind of my thought process. And then I was like, man, it's just, this is a pain in the, this is just way too difficult to do. So it's like, it started answering questions, right? So, and then I started going from there and I started using, there was a really famous guide here in Virginia that a lot of us look up to. His name's Chuck Kraft, who passed away a year ago, who was really the first fly fishing guide, warm water too. His main target was smallmouth bass here, and he's a legend. He had a lot of outside the box thinking flies. He had these flies called the Crelexes that he's created, and
I knew this.
And he's got the CK bait fish. That was some synthetic head with a chamois tail. So I started taking and trying to go off of that and started playing around with chamois materials and all that. And I was getting a little bit of movement, but it just still didn't have that three-dimensional, serpentine action that I was looking for. And, and then I started playing with bending wire. And that all came from just trying to make a longer platform for muskies, just because a lot of times you didn't have longer fibers that had motion.
Right.
So I started adding joints to my bigger musky flies to just create maybe another 3 or 4 inch long fly. And that was just to get a bigger presentation, a bigger profile of just more attracting qualities. And then I noticed, though, by adding a joint or two, you started having, it would just kind of fold up and collapse and kind of started getting this more of a serpentine motion, but it still didn't have that three-dimensional realistic profile. It was just still a fly that had an impressionistic view, right? So it's like that kind of shooting ahead after just terrible flies just wasn't working. I finally came back to what really makes a fish swim, and really looking at the biologic makeup of the fish, just like I was looking at the biologic predatory instincts of why fish trigger on certain things and why they don't. So what makes a fish swim? It's you have their fins, you have their muscle, and most importantly, their vertebrae. So it just like a steak, the vertebrae is what really allows all of it to work. So I was like, okay. And I started looking at lures. The Sebile Magic Swimmer is a prime example of that. And then you have a lot of variations of these jointed hard baits. And then you it's like, okay, well, they're starting to create a vertebrae. So, and I was like, okay, well, we have enough chenilles and enough materials on the market. What if I just start creating these little small vertebrae and connecting them? And I first originally started with a B chain. And that was a major pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Was trying to tie materials on B chain and have enough weight to have it move. It would work, but it was super hard to do, and it just wasn't worth it. But I knew at that point I was onto something. So, I was just playing around with a paper clip one day, and I was like, if I bend it and do this, I could create an interconnecting chain, basically, and I could start at the tail and work forward. And I'd tie one section at a time, and I get to the final hook, then make the head. I would maybe have what I'm looking for. And so the first parts of those, I I would have one or two that would swim right and the rest wouldn't. And I'm like, well, why is this not working? So then I had to go into an engineer's mind and figure out what the hell, why, what, and what I found out is you have different types of flows, and you have laminar flows and you have flows that are more like an obstacle, which is called turbulent style flows. So what I found is a lot of the flies that I was tying, and I was trying to keep them sparse, that the water was not being interrupted by the materials. Water was flowing through the fibers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was not being disrupted, or it wasn't being redirected around a solid mass like a lure or a regular fish's body. So I figured out that I had to create basically a skin or a more dense material that would not allow water to penetrate through the fibers, and basically creating a ramp for water to flow over. So that's the biggest problem with fly design over conventional lures, is most of the stuff we're using pulsates and moves. And that's kind of how we get our motion. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at it on another side, is I don't want pulsating movement. I want a rigid body that doesn't fluctuate much, because that changes how the water distributes around the body of the fly. And this took a long time to figure out, right? Like I said earlier, I'm not very smart. So, it takes a lot of trial and error, right?
Might not have been smart in the classroom, but dude, you're a genius when it comes to this. And that's what I find so interesting, is like when you found what you wanted and you're talking about this engineering mindset, do you think a teacher in high school, I know when I started doing things similar to what you're talking about and having this understanding of a concept that I would have never grasped in school. But because I'm so interested in this, I'm able to do it. And that sounds exactly like what's going on with you. You say you're not smart, but my God, you are. You're a genius. And it just took something that you're super interested in to bring that out. You know what I mean? Like that's super interesting to me.
Well, it's also a necessity too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like I was, like I said earlier, it's like your success on the water is directly impacted by
100%.
So for me, I mean, and I also chose early on I love trout, and I don't ever want to take anything away from trout fishing, but I don't know if I have ADHD or whatever it is, but I lose focus really quickly on stuff. And it just, I kind of went through the progression of all the different ways of catching trout. Mm-hmm. Larry has this thing, is like, when you start, you just want to catch a fish. Right. Then you want to catch a lot of fish. Then you want to, that whole progression.
I love it.
And I kind of went through that. Right. And as a guide, I kind of got tired of just trout fishing. So we have such a great smallmouth bass fishery here, and made sense to start targeting them. And I love the aggression, but also the technical aspect of how a really big trophy smallmouth. I think if you look at some of the really good designers and legends in our sport of fly fishing in general, a lot of them had a smallmouth bass background. Mm-hmm. If you really look at it, Lefty and Joe Brooks, all those, and Bob Clouser. I mean, smallmouth are a great fish to study on their behaviors, because they have so many different levels of how they feed and what they want. And as they grow, they're very aggressive, but they can also be very technical, especially when you get pressured fish like you were talking about. The bodies of water I grew up fishing, a lot of it's catch and release, because people just started doing that as we moved in, especially in the bass world, right? So as these fish get caught over and over, they get a lot smarter. So it was a great classroom for me to be able to take these flies, especially the Game Changer, and start seeing how these fish reacted, and being able to lure designs that's been the biggest thing for me, is being able to see all these great lure designs and adapting that to a fly. And that, I think that's really overlooked a lot.
It is overlooked. Yeah. It's especially overlooked by trout fishermen. And that's where the majority of fly tires reside, right? I mean, you got plenty of saltwater tires, you got plenty of smallmouth bass tires and musky tires and everything. But the majority, the majority of the fly tires are starting and pursuing trout. And in that world, a lot of times the spinning rod is looked at as evil or wrong or horrible, or you're not going to bunch of worm dunkers. You're not going to learn anything from those guys. Well, let them spend an afternoon with Larry Dahlberg. Like, no, you can learn a lot from those people. And a lot of those people are far more skilled at what they're doing than you will ever be dinking around with a fly rod, right? Like, because you don't have an open mind, or those people don't have an open mind. And I think that a lot of the saltwater tires do look that it's out of necessity, right? Like you got a customer that comes down and he's like, well, I want to catch a barracuda on fly. How do we do that? And he's like, man, I don't know. All I use is tube lures, right? So it's a green tube. Help me create a green tube fly. Goes to his buddy. Well, let's do a braided thing, and it'll be about this long, and try this. And yeah, it works. Not as good as a tube, but it worked. But I mean, the saltwater tires kind of look towards lure design like you did, and that is a way that you're going to progress. Is kind of the white belt mentality of learning from anyone. And when you get that closed mind focus, that is, I just think that's the death of your learning curve, right? Like if you're not looking to people who are being successful, if they're worm dunking and they're kicking your ass, well, they're doing something right. Like try to figure out what they're doing and and if you only like to fish with a fly rod, well, then see if you can figure out what they're doing. Like if they're out catching you 20-1 and you're just going to close your mind to that and think, bunch of worm dunkers.
Yeah.
That's a bad way to go.
Well, that's why fly fishing, in my mind, and I'm a lifelong fly angler and always will love it. And that's my preferred way of catching fish. But that's one thing that's held the fly fishing community back. Sure. And, I've followed your career for 30 years, and I know you've done it all too, guiding in Wyoming and all that. And, doing the salt. And I even had clients that used to fish with you, back in the day when you first got on with Scott, fly rods and all that stuff. So yeah, man. So, and it's a problem, and it's still a problem today. And, it's a sad story, to be honest. And it really bothers me about the fly community. I don't feel like, and I'm not trying to say I'm better than anybody else, but I feel like my body of work over 30 years has proven that I love fly fishing, and I've done some stuff in the industry. The sad thing is, it's like, Larry Dahlberg, he loves to come down and fish with me, and I love having him because I learned so much from him. But a sad thing that happened last year is me and Larry and two other buddies were out there fishing, and Larry, when he comes down, he wants to know what's in my body of water. And the best.
We froze up a little bit.
How about now?
Yeah. So he wants to know what's in your body of water.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And so what happens, we're in this particular time of year, chubs, if you want to try to catch a bait to use as live bait, and that's what I love about Larry. He's not afraid to he always talks about fly anglers are always looking through keyholes. Mm-hmm. And exactly what you were talking about earlier is like, that's the sad part of why our industry has not grown as fast as the conventional side, because there's too much resistant to change. And I think now with it's a whole lot better than it was 10, 20 years ago, for sure. There's a whole lot more people with open minds and people that are totally into traveling the world and catching all these exotic fish. And that has helped the mindset, but there's still a community out there that this other guy comes by us and sees that we have live lines out trying to catch muskies on. So he tries to turn this into like, that's the only way I catch them now is on live bait, which is ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. It's like the saltwater community. You guys use whatever it takes to catch the fish.
Dude, every day if you want to catch right? You'll have a fly angler one day, you have a bait angler the next day, unless you just decide that all I want to do is fly fish, which you can do that. That's fine. And many do. But lots of guides some of the people that I consider to be the very best, like a Richard Black or somebody like that, they're going to be bait fishing one day. They're going to be lure fishing the next day. They're going to be fly fishing for the next week. They're going to go back and they're going to catch them any which way they can the next day. And they've got anglers that respect all tackle and can do it all. But, as a guide, if you don't know what is going on with the bait, I don't know how you think you're going to be the best fly guide that you can possibly be. I
agree. That is the thing that gets lost. It's like, you can only, if you're a fly fisherman, you can only catch them.
So does that bother you? Like that you had that encounter and
totally.
Totally. But why? Like why do you let that bother you?
I don't know. I guess
because it bothers me.
Yeah, it bothers me. It bothers me because we were out there enjoying an unbelievable couple of days of fishing, and I have to guide for these fish and I enjoy it. And it's what I do for a living, but I have to get my butt kicked every day with new anglers that want to catch a muskie for the first time. And it's mostly 99% fly fishing. And I know where these fish are, and it's like, on a certain tide where tarpon are going to be coming down a bank, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you just know at certain times of the year where muskies are going to be in any given body of water in my area. I know it. I know exactly where they're going to be. And the only thing I can't control is my angler's ability and that fish's mood at that particular time, right?
And the weather.
Right. And all I can do is put us in the best situation to make it happen. So when I have a guy that I think is one of the greatest anglers of all time come down and he wants to catch them how he wants to catch them. And I think it's fun to go back to being a child and go to a creek and catch chubs on worms. And then you go put that in front of a predatory fish and have it eat it immediately. Like, you may know exactly where they are and you just have to make them eat with a fly or a conventional lure or whatever. They have to be in that mood. But with a live bait, it really teaches you that one, where they are, whether they're not eating that day or not, but you put a live bait in there, they're going to eat it. And this is the interesting thing. And this is the other thing that I have a problem with. It's like the conception and where people want to get on soapboxes is exactly what you're talking about, is how you learn from all different avenues and of fishing, whether it's conventional, live bait, soft plastics, you name it, and fly. So if you take a certain situations, like Larry told me a long time ago that he's experienced all kinds of, he's even taken a thermometer and put it in a muskie's butt to see what its internal temperature was related to the water around it, mm-hmm. to see when their optimal time of feeding was. And he's figured all that out by looking outside the box.
Right.
The other thing he's done is he told me a long time ago, he goes, I used to experiment with buying suckers from a farm and catching live suckers in the body of water that live with muskies on a daily basis. And he goes, without a doubt, the fish, the sucker that lives in the body of water will get eaten 10 times faster than the sucker that lives in a farm pond. He said, because they don't know what a predator is. That the fish that lives with that predator every day knows that it's harnessed with a hook or whatever. In this case, Larry likes to take wire and run it through the fish's nose and not use hooks and just watch how muskies will hold on to them. And you can just pull them up. A lot of times we're just pulling it up just to see what size they are and then, try to net them without a hook. Right. But the cool thing is you learn, like, that shows you predator-prey relationship.
For sure.
If a prey item doesn't act scared of the predator's like, something's wrong here.
Right.
So it doesn't eat it. I've seen in a lot of these days in clear water where you'll have all kinds of prey items, whether it be smallmouth bass or suckers or whatever, setting and swimming right next to muskies, and they don't even bother them. But soon as you hook one of those fish, mm-hmm. and it starts struggling, mm-hmm. you triggered that. It's going to die.
Same thing with Jack Crevalle's on a bull shark or something like that. Like they're swimming next to that fish's eyeballs and they've been there for a month And if you hook one of those, it is an instant bite. But they've been there for a month. That bull shark's been saying, man, you make one mistake and I'm going to eat you for a month. But they do. Like it's that one little thing. If they do a weird kick, they're on it. That's super interesting. So what advice do you think that Larry would give you about that encounter? What would he say? Or he probably said something.
He was like, it's just disappointing. And he goes, this is typical of why he got out of just fly back in the 80s, is because of that just mentality. It's like, and it's so funny when you get into the freshwater scene, that if you don't do it a certain way, then you're not a fly angler. Right. And which is completely the wrong idea. It's like you said, if you want to become the best at what you do, you have to understand all aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what Larry, that's what he's taught me for years. And that is true. That's how I've been able to get where I am in this industry and be able to.
Another thing that you're doing, that you're going to other types of fish and other places and then making correlations between a cobia and a muskie, which a lot of people aren't going to, I don't know. I remember saying something about, when I was first learning how to fish for baby tarpon, I was like, oh, I like baby tarpon because they're kind of like largemouth bass in a lot of ways. And this person that I was talking to was like, there is nothing similar for a tarpon and a largemouth bass. That is the most craziest comparison I've ever heard. I was like, really? Like they sit there under the trees and you throw something in there and they come out and eat it? Like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of similarities between the largemouth. Yeah. They have the same mouth structure. They eat things the same. And for me, I made a correlation to that, and it helped my fishing considerably because I was very familiar with a largemouth bass. I had no familiarity with a tarpon. So I took what I knew about a bass, applied it to the tarpon. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. To their credit, some of it didn't work at all, but some of it did work. And it made me much more comfortable with baby tarpon and being able to catch them. And I don't know. I think that, that attitude is certainly not welcoming. Like if you wonder why the fly fishing world and the fly fishing sport is not growing, well, when you encounter that attitude of you bait fished once in your life, you're not a fly fisherman. It's like, really? Well, wow. Okay.
Right.
I thought I was a fly fisherman.
Catching them. That's the It's that's the sad reality. But the one thing that I have to always go back on too, it's only 1% that actually think that anymore, I feel like, but it's that little bit that just bothers you. I don't know what it does. I don't know why I let it bother me, but it does. I guess because I've spent so much time really putting the effort in to figure things out. It's kind of insulting to have someone just make a comment like that and not have. I was more upset that the encounter was so negative to have a legend like Larry with me,
right?
And having that kind of a deal. It's like, man, this just. But Larry's like, you just can't let stuff bother you like that. And Lefty would have told me the same thing, but you know, it's kind of hard not to.
The funny thing about what I noticed in my career is that there were when I first got started, it was before River Runs Through It came out. It was before you had a big influx of anglers, and then you would see these guys in the Florida Keys, like a Fitz Coker, who was one of my best customers, and he started out bait fishing, and then he caught tarpon every single way that you could possibly catch them, as many as you can possibly imagine, until he just got tired of it. I never want to catch another one on bait. I'm not into it. I've caught thousands of them on bait. I've caught hundreds of them chumming. I've caught bunches of them on lures. So he was always looking for that next challenge, and he worked his way up from the easiest to the hardest. And then he became a fly angler that he had no interest in going backwards and doing it the way that he had done it. Like you were saying, it's like being a kid. You were catching these chubs again, and you were doing all this stuff. And then you had worked your way up to this point to where, why do you want to go backwards? You've done that a million times before. You're looking for the next challenge. And almost all fly anglers were like that. And then fly fishing got to be more accessible to people, to where they could just jump right in. And they would jump right in on a fish like a bonefish. And then they would say, well, why would you ever want to spin fish for bonefish? Or I don't know. I think that's where a lot of that attitude comes from with some people, and not everybody, and not every fly angler has this attitude, by the way.
No, they don't.
But
that's for sure.
What I'm saying is that it used to be that the path to fly fishing was starting with worms and bobbers and working your way up. And then as it's become more accessible, as there's schools, as there's more guides, as there's more opportunity, you could cut that entire learning process out of your fly fishing background, right? And you could just jump right in and catch a tarpon as your first fish that you've ever caught in your life on a fly rod, right? Where a Fitz Coker had to catch 5,000 of them on spin before he caught the one on fly, because he's trying to figure it out. So now he's like, oh, this is the challenge. That's the one that got me the most excited out of the 5,000 I've caught before. This is the one that I got the most excited about, and this is the way I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. Cool. Yeah. Whatever.
It is.
I mean, you know what? Yeah. That's fine. And if you, I don't know. This is an attitude that really kind of bothers me too, because it's like, if you don't want to if bait is not your thing, that's cool. Do your thing. Do whatever you do. But why do you have to criticize the other people? And when you do, it splits. And on a much bigger level, it splits anglers from conventional to fly, from bait to lure, you see it happen all over the place, from saltwater to freshwater. And when you split anglers, when you have a conservation something associated with conservation that is necessary right now, and you need all anglers to unite, it makes it much more difficult for everyone to come together when you're infighting. Like I call it infighting, and I think it's ridiculous and silly that a fly angler would care one way or another what somebody else is doing, or a bait fisherman wouldn't like a fly fisherman, or a lure fisherman would get upset with a live baiter. Like, why? Like, what do you care? I mean, I guess if they're killing fish or something like that, but I don't know. If you're having fun, it all boils down to having fun to me. If you're having fun and that's what you like to do, go for it. And you know what? In some other situations, like what you're talking about, you're doing something different to learn. You're not even necessarily having fun with it. Maybe it's not even fun. Maybe you were like, man, I'd really rather be fly fishing. Larry Dahlberg can throw it into a teacup at 80 feet, and I'd like to see him do that. But this is what he wants to do, and this is what we're going to do, and maybe I might learn something, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. And yeah, and I've been out there with him where last year, my buddy Chris and I were with him, and we were like, man, we wanted to go fly fishing, actually, because we had, I mean, it's so amazing. So this is what I think is really sad on the side of what we've been talking about, is the things that I've gotten to see by not looking through a keyhole. Most people will not ever get to see. Like a prime example last year. I think within those 4 or 5 days that we fished, I think we landed over 40 some muskies, just playing around with the bait deal.
Wow.
In one particular day, we found, and this was something that was very interesting too, is we had a shakeup, or what I call a shakeup, is where we had a big influx of water. And a lot of times what'll happen is these fish will start moving, and where I was fishing them all week, they weren't in those spots. They moved to another place. And just by knowing this over years of learning fish behavior, and especially in this case, muskie, that I was like, all right, they're not here. It's obvious because we're using these live baits and we're not moving them, or they're not eating it. It's like, let's go up about a half a mile or 3/4 of a mile to a mile. They should be there. But last time we had a big high water event, this is where they were. And sure enough, we put the baits in. Both boats at the time, we were fishing 2 boats. Both boats, the baits got in there. They were both eaten within 5 seconds. So we're drifting down. Larry's in my boat. Chris and Josh are in the other boat, and we both got muskies. And we're noticing, we just let them chew on them for a while, because if you want to try to land them without a hook or whatnot, you just kind of let them eat it. And you got to let them take it down, and then you can pull them up with the net and they'll either spit it out, finally regurgitate it or whatever, and you're not hurting them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're getting a free meal, right? They're getting a free meal out of the deal, and you just pull it real hard and let them eat it. So it's just it's actually kind of a humane way for the muskies to fish for them. Not too humane for the suckers,
mm-hmm.
But the cool thing about it is we went back into that same spot, and every muskie, there must have been 20 fish in that spot. We actually dropped one of those fall fish in, and we had 4, I think, muskies eat it at the same time.
Wow.
And we were playing around, and we were like, a lot of times just by the way you watch how it goes, usually, and this is something else that learning from the sucker deal, this is another thing. He goes, you ever noticed when a muskie eats that he'll always eat going downstream? I'm like, I was like, this happened 10 years ago. I'm like, no, I haven't noticed that. He goes, pay attention. So I started looking as we were getting eats on figure 8s and whatnot. They would always make that eat using their current to their advantage to accelerate into the fly and going and eating it downstream, because it enables them to, 1, not expend as much energy, and 2, they're going to be able to accelerate a little bit more going downstream than they are going into the current. And it's little things like that, looking outside the box or not looking into that keyhole and Larry shared with me. And I wouldn't have seen some of this stuff I may not have ever noticed that if he hadn't said something, but he wouldn't have noticed it if he hadn't tried all types of different things to be able to see how these fish feed and why they do it. But it all makes sense once you see how it works.
Yeah.
So we get into the spot, and, generally once a muskie eats, and they're generally in the wintertime, and I like guiding for them now, because what happens is you get a big condensed population of fish in a smaller area, which makes it a whole lot easier, especially on a fly, to target them when you know exactly where they're going to be and you have a higher volume of fish in a smaller area, right? So you drop this bait down, and generally when a muskie will eat a live bait, they're going to take it off somewhere away from their buddies and go eat it and digest it. And then they'll come back to wherever they're laying, and then they'll digest it and whatever. But once they eat the bait, they're going to take it off so they can have it. It's kind of, I'm sure you've seen birds do it, like gulls or whatever, grab a bait on the surface and they're swimming off, they're running off with it, and all the buddies are trying to take it from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same thing with muskies. So a prime example of this is we dropped the bait down and it got eaten, and we noticed that it's not running off like it should. And we're like, something's going on. And, Larry's caught thousands and thousands of muskies and on all types of tackle. And he gets impatient, right? He's like, well, let's just go ahead and pull it up. We don't know what it is. It's like, well, I don't know, man, let's give it a little bit more time. It's like, all right, well, he goes, now let's just see what's going on. It's just acting weird. So you can just run the boat over to where the fish are. We usually just leave them alone so they don't know where we're there. So, but we decided to run the boat over to where they are, and he's just reeling in without any pressure. And then we get over top of him. He just reels up real slow. And the next thing you know, we got like 4 muskies, and it looks like a Medusa. You got one here, one here, one here. And you got like a 15-inch bait that's got a muskie attached to it on all sides. It's like that just lets you know, one, where they are. And the other thing about it too is I've had my butt kicked so much by muskies over the years by doing it the harder way. It's kind of nice to know that you still own them. You can catch them when you want to. Just, it's a mental thing for me. When Larry comes down, it's like, all right, we're just going to go have fun. And it's just going to kind of, it's going to allow me to understand their behavior more. And it also, even though you may have a day where the client's doing everything right and you're just not moving fish or whatever, but if you put a live bait down there and you catch them versus not catching them on conventional, that tells you something, right? It tells you you're not doing what they want you to do. And you need to change what you're doing. And that, for me, it's like you said, doing it on fly is the hardest way of doing it for sure. But it's taught me so much about what fish want and what they don't want and how they want it to do it. And being able to view it from all aspects just reconfirms what I do know and what I don't know.
Yeah.
And, on the days that I don't do well, or the days that I am that keeps me up at night, that makes me want to say, all right, what do I need to do? What did I do wrong? What do I need to fix tomorrow? And that's the stuff that keeps me going.
What's interesting about that too is like you're comparing bait to fly and all that stuff, but you can also see the other way, like in a community of guides that, you got friends that are fly fishing, you got friends that are bait fishing, whatever. Some days the bait fishermen are not catching them, tarpon specifically, and the fly guys are catching them. They smoke them. And you're just like,
I've seen that.
Like how I had a live well full of mullet and I caught 0 and this guy jumped 16 on the ocean. Like what is going on? Well, maybe it's a worm hatch. Maybe it's something else that you can't replicate with your bait. And so you see it both ways. And that's why I think that it's ultra important to keep that open mind to the whole thing. But man, you got an awesome mindset for it's no wonder whatsoever that you have been able to create the stuff that you have. I want to get back to the game changer because I know we're running out of time here for a second, but one of the things that I've been the most impressed, and it's funny because earlier you said that you lose focus with things. Maybe you have ADD or whatever. When I look at the game changer, I'm like, well, first of all, I've never come up with a fly that is anywhere remotely has as much potential as what you have. Like the game changer is really cool. I have come up with some different flies and some of them have been kind of unique and stuff, but then I tie them for a couple of weeks and use them for a while. And then I just kind of drop it and move on. And some of them I keep, or I'll hand off to a professional tyer and he'll tie me 10 dozen of them or whatever. But you have stayed with this platform, this game changer platform. And all you got to do is go look at your Instagram, and you've done it with many different materials for many different sizes, for many different species, for many, many different things. You're using feathers, you're using synthetics, you're using everything that you can possibly imagine. You're taking other things that are interesting, like the mop tail for trout, like that. The mop fly is super effective. The Chinese dragon kind of thing. You've got all this stuff working into these patterns, into this platform, and it's becoming more and more refined over the years. You may not see it as much as an outsider does, like me. I'm like, man, the first game changer I saw didn't look anything like this. Now this looks like a piece of art. Like what you're putting out now looks so good and so refined. And that's the only way it gets there. Like, it's not a surprise that that this all came from the Gummy Minnow that looked nothing like the game changer, right? And that there's been these horrible evolutions of this thing before it turns into this true work of art. Like what you have now it's unique, it's interesting, but it's also been refined, and you continue to stay with it, even though you say that you have trouble with focus. Like what do you think the future of the game changer is? I mean, you're another thing that I didn't mention is you're using it in nymphs, you're using it in all different kinds of things. You even said you had like a crab idea. So like, what is the future? Are you going to work on this pattern or this platform, or are you going to continue to try to find the absolute perfect material for each species, or what is it that you're hoping for?
All of that. So all of it. I mean, Harry put me in that position. I could tell you a funny story. Harrison Steve's a biologist. He's brilliant. But he was also, when I met him, I was 16. So everybody that knows him, he's kind of known as a curmudgeon, but he's very intelligent and funny. And it was me and David. David was the only person I knew at my age, the guy I was telling you about that Muskie fished with me. Mm-hmm. We both, Harry and Steve Heiner both took us under their wing at an early age. And one particular day, Steve Heiner had a guide trip, and Harry tagged along, and we met Harry down on the Smith River, which is a tailwater here in Virginia. And we walked down the railroad tracks to go fish these pools, and we're all catching fish here and there. And, Harry's on the other side of the river from David and I, and he starts catching one after the other. So after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, David and I walk across the river. David gets to Harry first, probably five minutes before me. and he's opened up his box and he's handing David one of the flies that he's using. And I'm like, so what are you using? And without a hesitation, it's perfect. I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but he goes, screw you, you're not old enough. And so I'm like, all right, at that point, I was like, I'm going to come up with a fly one day that he's going to be dying to have. It hurt my feelings. One, and I didn't know Harry that well at the time, but it was funny, but it pissed me off too. Right. I was like, I'm going to come, it sparked something in me. Is like, you know what? But it was an eye-opening thing. It's like, we all were doing decent and catching fish, but Harry figured out what was up, and he was catching fish every cast, and it just reinstituted in my mind about how important the fly is. I mean, we spend so much money on gear and all that kind of stuff, but it's the lure or the bait or the fly that's really the most important process of our whole sport. I mean, it's the most important part. You have to deliver it to them, right? But what they see is directly impacting how you do on the water, right? So that was my main goal at 16 years old until now I'm in my 40s. That's what drives me every day. When I'm on the water, I want to learn something new that I didn't know before that I can put towards a fly. And that's why there's so many different materials that I use for the Game Changer platform, because at certain sizes and in certain conditions, these materials will do different things in the water. The clearer the water, the more time the fish has to look at the fly, the more realistic and more translucent the material needs to be. And it needs to have that three-dimensional realistic swimming. It's like we learned early on, profile, silhouette, and size are all super important. Movement gets the fish to your offering, but it's like a trout in a slow-moving pool versus a trout in a ripple. They have to make an instant decision to eat it or not. The slower the pool, they can come up on a dry fly and look at it forever and decide, is that the right color? And they don't even see the color until they get right there. Right. And then they can say, well, that is a size 16 sulfur and it's got that orange hue that I've been eating. I'm going to eat it with confidence. So I know all that stuff by doing it. And streamer fishing or lure fishing, it's all the same. It's just it's different. You're trying to trigger movement into it to get them there. And that's why I have it in the nymph versions. And I have these really cool shrimp patterns. And my problem is I don't live anywhere near permit, but I mean, my goal is to figure out the permit fly. I mean, that is my next major goal. I just got to be able to put it in front of permit. I want to be on a bow. I don't have to be fishing, but I would just want to see how they interact with what you throw to them. I just don't have enough, knowledge or
the advice I'm going to give you for if you're trying to create a permit fly is throw some crabs at them too, because dude, I mean, I don't know the way I've been saying this for years is, you can have a live well full of crabs, and if they all die and you go out there and you throw them at the permit, they don't look at them anything better than they would a fly. They kind of eat them about like a fly. Sometimes they'll eat them, sometimes they won't. You got to impart a little action to them, and it's not scent. You'll hear a lot of people, oh, it smells like crab. Put a little crab juice on it and it'll work. I don't think so. It looks like a dead crab. They don't like dead crabs, and they don't want to eat them. You can sometimes catch them, but you throw a live crab out there that makes noise. You get the right crab, that thing clicks and makes noise, and it sounds, it has an audible sound, and the legs are moving so fast, and it moves its legs back in one direction and almost looks like a fish swimming. They can swim so fast, and it has kind of a pear shape, kind of like the fat head part of it going forward because all the legs are going backwards, and it almost looks like a fish. And certain crabs swim way faster than others. And man, when they see that, dude, there's a puff of mud, 4 feet wide, and they just ate the crap out of it. And there is no doubt. And I have never thrown a fly at a permit that reacts that way. And like, when you throw like you're throwing size 16 sulfurs at trout, and they eat and they eat and they eat, and then they eat your fly, and it's no different. And sometimes they even eat something else after your fly, and it's no different. Their behavior is exactly the same. Okay, I did that, right? You throw a jerk bait to a tarpon in a situation to where they're exploding stuff on the surface, and they explode on that jerk bait just exactly like they do everything else. You got it. That's you're not going to do better than that. But when their behavior is like they go, I don't know what that is. Okay, I'll eat it. And they eat it. You're like, okay, we caught him, but that's not it. Like we have it for bonefish. Like you can throw something over for a bonefish and they get super excited about it, and they eat it, and their tail goes crazy, and their dorsal fin flares up, and they do all this cool stuff. But I don't know. I mean, there's some permit flies out there, and there's some guys that are doing it really, really well right now, and some secret flies and all kinds of stuff, and people are catching more than they ever have. But I just hadn't seen it personally. Maybe you can do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say I can, but I'm going to try.
Yeah.
It's like I said.
But I think it's motion though, and sound. That's what I think. But I know a guy that knows a little bit about permit that has a boat that might put you on some fish.
That'd be awesome. A short story real quick is exactly what you were talking about is, I keep bringing Larry up, but I mean, he's kind of my sounding board because he's done it all.
Right.
So I've been trying to play with this idea, and I've talked to him about permit, and he talks about going years ago back in the, I guess, 90s, where he'd go somewhere, secret spot where all these permit were, and he had just bushel of crabs, live ones. And he got up on this hard top T-top, was pitching crabs to these permit and breaking legs off and doing all this kind of stuff, and watching the reaction of the crab to the permit with less leg parts or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he was just saying there's a certain way that they swim, and he felt like it was a swimmerettes. Mm-hmm. And he said as long as they had one swimmerette that was working, it would get eaten. Mm-hmm. But as soon as he would clip those off or whatever, they wouldn't eat it anymore. He said it was just
I believe it. I know a lot of guides. Some of the best permit guides I know, when they have the opportunity to either have crabs with claws or without claws, they go with claws, right? Everybody wants them without claws because you don't like to get pinched when you go into the live well. But these guys were like, I mean, that's the first time I ever heard that. I was like, seriously? And yeah, that's natural. He has two claws, and when you take those off, it's not as natural, and they'll still eat it plenty well, but I like this guy was like Mark Croca. He was like, man, if a permit gets bit by a crab, then he just eats it even harder. And I was like, yeah, I like that. You imagine the claws biting the permit on the face as he's eating this crab, and then he's just like, "Grr." And then you get the super bite. But anyway, that's awesome, man. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it close. But I want to do this again, man. I love talking about all this stuff, and I would love to get Larry Dahlberg on the podcast. Maybe you can help me with that. And I would also love to fish with you, man, up in Muskieville. I don't know what your schedule's like. I can only imagine that it's fully booked all the time. But if somebody wanted to fish with you, if somebody wanted to learn how to tie a game changer, if somebody wants to check out anything that you've done, where do they go?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a website right now because I always call it a shit show. I'm just I've been working on a website for a couple of years now, and just don't ever have the time to put it together. But the best way to reach me is by email at bchocklett@comcast.net, or Instagram or Facebook. Private message me on that. This year I am booked for the musky season, but I've got a lot of things in my future I'm really wanting to work on, and I feel like you were saying about the muskie. I'm really, really interested in a couple other fish species. So I'm going to hopefully in the near future going to be able to spend more time doing that and design work with some of the companies I'm working with, especially like Flyman Fishing Company, who's doing my flies now. And they're doing such a good job. It's freeing me up to be able to go explore other fish and species to try to kind of help. I mean, I'm not saying I'll be able to do it, but I'm going to give it hell trying for sure.
I love it, man.
I'm not afraid of failure. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's failure comes, to get to the game changer. I would imagine there's been 10,000 failures, like the light bulb.
Oh yeah,
like that was what Edison said, right? Like he said, it's just the first one that worked. Like,
he found 10,000 ways not to make a light.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
It's true.
I really appreciate you doing it. I really enjoyed talking to you, getting to know you a little bit better, and let's get together and go fishing, man. Let's
do it.
I'd love it.
It's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Blane. Blane Chocklett.
Thank you.
Check him out. Definitely use his flies. Check him out. All right. See ya.